Great. Thank you and welcome to the City Club of Central Oregon. Today's live stream is COVID-19’s impact on our communities. My name is Tammy Bainey. I'm the Executive Director of the Central Oregon Intergovernmental Council, your region's Council of Governments, and I'm honored to serve today as the moderator. Before we begin the program, I have a few announcements. First, I'd like to give a shout out to City Club's annual sponsors. Without their support, we would not be able to bring you today's live stream. We had a number of businesses step up to sponsor today's program. City Club would like to thank Steel Associate Architects, Miller Lumber, Ashley and Vance Engineering, and Empire Construction and Development as today's presenting sponsors. City Club has been today's supporting sponsors, my apologies, are Flagline Engineers, SunWest Builders, and Acuity Wealth Advisors. These organizations, in the words of one of today's sponsors, represent what City Club stands for and are happy to stand in support of our mission. City Club has been disrupted by the coronavirus pandemic and its impact on public events. If you watch and enjoy today's presentation, please consider making a donation. If you've been toying with the idea of becoming a member, now would be a great time to sign up. Your support during this challenging time will help ensure your City Club is ready to bring you back together in person for conversations of consequence that help our region thrive. We have a short clip from City Club member Taylor Thompson to talk about membership.
Hi, my name's Taylor Thompson and I'm on the City Club membership committee, and I also work for a bank, and ironically, I get to wear a mask now to work. I never thought we'd be able to wear a mask at a bank. How cool is that? In this time of social distancing, we believe staying engaged with you is extremely important. And we're so happy that we can do that through our online forums. And we can't wait until we can again do this in person when it's safe to do so. And one of the ways that you can help engage with us is to become a member, or maybe you're already a member. And so now more than ever, your support through membership is vital to keeping us strong and being able to provide these services into the future. And one of the ways that you can do that is to go to City Club at cityclubco.org and check out the membership link right at the top and take advantage of automatic renewal, because there are some great advantages there and there's a lot of information. So I encourage you to check out that link. Thanks again for joining us today. I hope you have a wonderful time, and I can't wait to see you soon.
Today's live stream would not be possible without Hand in Hand Productions. City Club is proud to partner with Matt Hand as we venture into the brave new digital world. Thanks so much for all that you do for our community, Matt. Okay, so think back about a year ago when we were all at Eagle Crest for the regional forum. I was one of the panelists there to talk about growth and its impact on housing, jobs, culture, and equitable access to economic opportunities. It feels like so much has changed, even in the past few months. But has it? The Swedish proverb, rough waters are truer tests of leadership. In calm water, every ship has a good captain. Seems pretty fitting for today. The kickoff of 2020 has brought about some pretty choppy waters, a new decade, and a pandemic. We are now nearly 9 weeks into the Stay Home, Save Lives order from Governor Brown. Public health officials have stated that this action has helped Oregon flatten the curve with the COVID-19 virus. Each of the 3 counties in our region have submitted reopening plans to the governor, and each has been approved for phase 1, a soft opening, if you will, of our communities. In the midst of a public health crisis, the connection between the cities and counties is essential. Counties are the boards of health in Oregon and operate public health offices, providing the essential response to a pandemic such as this. Today, we will learn about how the COVID-19 event has impacted our cities around the region. We will learn what we should expect in terms of economic recovery, how our cities are responding to budget shortfalls and the cancellation of long-standing signature events, and what opportunities come about during a time of crisis such as this. We are fortunate to have the city managers from 6 of our cities in the region with us here today to talk about how they are navigating these choppy waters. I'd like to welcome City Manager from La Pine, Melissa Bethel, Madras City Administrator Gus Burril, Prineville City Manager Steve Forrester, Redmond City Manager Keith Wikoski, Sister City Manager Cory Misley, and Bend City Manager Eric King. So Eric, let's start with you. As the city manager of Oregon's largest city east of the Cascade, and now sixth largest in the state, the partnership with Deschutes County and the city of Bend is important. However, during a pandemic, the partnership with the city is critical in terms of the public health response. Has the COVID-19 event changed your relationship with the county? And what has been the primary role of the city in response to the COVID-19 event?
Well, first off, thank you, Tammy. Thanks, City Club, for putting this event on. It's been a pleasure to do this every year and really demonstrate, I think, the great coordination that occurs amongst our cities, and in the case of this question, the county. I think that my first reaction to the question would be the relationship with the county is already, I think, in a good place. And so that's always important. You never want to sort of walk into a crisis like this and have to sort of deal with repairing a relationship. We've got strong connections within our county when it comes to law enforcement, emergency response planning, sharing of resources within our public health or our public works sort of arena. And so really what this, as you pointed out in the question, the pandemic is really a public health issue. And so cities are not the public health experts. That's not a service that we provide. But our job really is to provide some translation for our community to help take some of that information and share it with our business community, the community groups that we work most closely with. Because I think people look at us as a touch point. So that coordination is really key. And I think a big piece of that, from my perspective, has been our Emergency Operations Center, which has been it's coordinated under the Sheriff's Office. And that Emergency Operations Center really brings together all the disciplines that are needed to respond to this crisis. So public health, St. Charles, the cities, the other functions of the county law enforcement, fire EMS, et cetera. So we've got the infrastructure in place as well as the practice from previous events like Two Bowls and mainly kind of fire and some, in the case of Bend, we've had also some practice with big snow events too, in working together. So we've spent a lot of time at the city making sure that we're following county policy work. So everything from the short-term rental ban that the county did, and trying to, we talked about that. We didn't end up taking the same action at the county as the county did in putting an enforcement ban, but we track that very closely. And we are going to continue to track the issues around tourism and tourism promotion and how to balance that with the local economy and public health issues. Of course, we followed the reopening plan really closely as the county was working through the drafting of that plan, and made sure that we were connecting our relationship with our business community and ensuring that their concerns were voiced on up to the governor's office, as well as incorporated into our own local reopening plan so that we could provide some certainty for our business community. And then as well, just providing touch points within with the public health officials. So we've had Dr. George Conway come to our council meetings to brief our policymakers on what's happening, where he's going to come again next week, along with OSU Cascades, to provide an update on some of the research that we're doing specific to Bend. So I would say, in closing and reflection, I think the relationship was strong to begin with. It's now stronger. And I would say the one area that we want to continue to really focus in on as we go through this transition process with the phasing, phase 1 and phase 2 and beyond, is on the public health side, to make sure that our connection, especially between economic development and public health, is really tight. So we've been setting up kind of weekly huddle meetings with some of the folks in the county public health. And then as we kind of think about the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, how do we kind of shift from a response mode to more of a recovery mode? So we've been involved in those discussions as well.
That is really great to hear, Eric. In some parts of the state, the relationship between the cities and the counties isn't as strong as it is in our region. And so it is nice to hear that you're starting from a place where you already have an established relationship that's strong and can really pivot into addressing the crisis instead of needing to restart a relationship. So Keith, how about with you? So your experience in the city of Redmond and the role of the city during this event.
So with us, I'm going to talk, well, I'll answer the question, but I think that, Eric talked a little bit about Bend and the county, and for Redmond, our ability to work closely with Bend on basically a weekly basis throughout this, because the key has been, how do we make sure that we're communicating what's going on? How do we help small business? And then how do we harness as much expertise as possible. So we've got this great situation as the two largest cities and close together in Central Oregon, where our mayors do a joint press conference every Thursday to make sure people can hear firsthand what's going on. We've worked together with our chambers and with Visit Bend and our tourism entities to make sure that we're getting the input we need on what businesses first needed to reopen and now what they need to continue to be reopened as we strive to reach a phase 2, since we're in phase 1. So there's the economic component, and it's not that exciting, but one of the things we've been able to do also is basically share our expertise at the staff level. So whether it's our communication staff, whether it's the public safety staff, in the case of Eric and I, basically being able to combine our skill sets and be able to help our organizations. Because what occurred, and I'll wrap this up quickly, is when things began to close down, it was how quickly can we get out there and begin to triage helping businesses. So basically setting up a MASH unit to go help businesses understand how to find money, how to get guidance, and to know that basically our staff cares about them, because in some situations, the property owners maybe didn't call the tenant. So we had a number of staff on the phone to businesses talking to them about this. And this was, 4 days into it in mid-March. And a lot of the ideas that we used were ones that Eric King and his staff had put together, so we could kind of follow their lead. And that's basically what's been going on, is making sure that we communicate, that we're unified, and that the community's expectations are being met.
Great. Thank you for that. I love to hear the connection between the cities and working together and leveraging your resources and learning from one another. So some of you are fairly new to your roles. Others have weathered the Great Recession in this region. What lessons maybe were learned during that time that could be applicable today? So I'm going to turn to Steve Forrester. I believe you've been in your role since around 2009, maybe. Okay, so you've been in the Crook County area in the Prineville community for many years. Thoughts on what you may have learned during the recession and maybe what could be applied today with this particular event?
Well, thank you, Tammy, and thank you, City Club, for the opportunity to visit with you this afternoon. I think there's a whole lot of lessons, but I think it boils down to a couple of things that I think we can all relate to, and that, this experience reinforces the importance of having that economic diversification amongst the Central Oregon Tri-County region. And I think clearly, as we entered the last recession, one of the things we realized is we had a significant amount of sensitivity to forest products, for example. I think today we could argue maybe we have some out of balance with our relationship with tourism as it relates to the sensitivity to the economic well-being of our Tri-County region. So I think this experience reinforces the importance of having that balance between tourism, between resource-based industries, agriculture, forest products, and of course the other great things that are happening in Central Oregon with the strength of the healthcare industry, the tech industry, the innovative nature of some of the projects that are going on over in Bend, with some very innovative industries doing very well over there. So I think that balance and economic diversification is super, super important. Along with that, I think one of the things we found amongst ourselves, and I think this is true across the board, is the importance of partnerships. And I think Eric and Keith did a great job of illustrating the importance of that relationship, whether it's communication, learning, spreading the information around, helping small businesses. But those partnerships are not only important between local governments, whether that's county or municipal, health departments, Crook County Fairgrounds, Deschutes County Fairgrounds, all those different entities had, different takes and different needs at different times, not to mention the private sector. So having said that, one of the things that I think really came to the forefront in terms of a win for all of us is some public-private relationships that really helped out in time of need, especially as it relates to small businesses. I think Keith just mentioned, they were able to react in about 4 days with some programs and some information over in the Bend-Redmond area. And I think that is true as well for Prineville. We had a great public-private partnership with Facebook, who stepped in with some significant dollars that what I would characterize as built a bridge between the information that went out on the federal and state level in terms of PPE and the CARE Act for our small businesses, but that took time, and we had some stumbles there, and we were able to put together a program in Crook County that got money to about 150 small businesses in a matter of days. So I think, partnerships are real important, and these are just fundamental things that I think got reinforced in the past several weeks as we've learned more about ourselves, our sensitivities to our different industries, and the importance of having those very strong relationships already established to as Eric illustrated.
Great. Thank you for that, Steve. That connection with the private sector too, and having Facebook in your backyard probably doesn't hurt. I know they've been an incredible partner across the region, and in particular in the Crook County area. At a time such as this, that relationship is really important.
Yeah, I agree, Tammy. And I think you said something I meant to say that I think super, super important. And I preach this every chance I get, in that, the Facebook, that tech industry base that, thankfully, and we're very grateful that it is in Prineville, Crook County, but it truly is a regional asset. And I think that's really important. And that relationship needs to be characterized as a regional relationship. So thank you for that.
Oh, absolutely. Happy to. They've been doing a lot of great community work, and it's nice to have them in the region. So with Melissa and Cory, you both started your positions as city managers in your current roles around late 2018. And I'm sure you had 2020 all mapped out. So in terms of planning as a city manager, you always plan for crisis. But experiencing something such as this is really not in the playbook. So how has this impacted your communities, and being relatively new in your roles? What has it done with your what you've laid out for 2020? And is that out the window and you've needed to regroup, or what does that look like? And Melissa, I think I'll start with you first. And you've been in your position since around November of 2018 and in the Lapine community. So we'd love to hear how things are going.
Thanks, Tammy. Well, fortunately, Lapine was well managed before me. So previous city managers have done very well in preparing the city, and Lapine sits financially well. So we're optimistic. We really, I basically, we're going, and I plan for zero growth. You start sticking money away in contingencies and unappropriated, I told the council, you hope, you don't hope for the worst, but you plan for it, and you just hope that everything goes on. I mean, we're still, I'm sure the other cities would say the same. Our construction is just cooking along and hasn't even missed a beat. We still got, planning files coming in, new subdivisions. And I'm thinking for Lapine, that's pretty much what's going to carry us. So we'll see what those state revenues come in at. And we're just hoping for the best. I think we'll be fine. Actually, I think we're going to be doing all right. We have some contingencies in place that if we have shortfalls in places, we can make those up. But other than that, I think us being in a bubble down here kind of helps. The economic issues weren't quite the same as it's probably been in Redmond experienced. Sadly, because we don't have the retail, but in this case, it worked out to our benefit. Pretty much all our stores were essential. So it's kind of been, business as usual here. And for that, we're kind of grateful. And we're, being a small town, we were able to help our own. So you had a lot of people who probably don't eat out as often started eating out more just to help those businesses stay in business, the restaurants. And so, for takeout, obviously. But yeah, I'm gleaning and I'm learning. We did expertise and staff allowed us to put in place things quickly, get links and work with them. And so it's actually been a really positive experience, to tell the truth.
Great. And your leadership is definitely the right place at the right time. So speaking of city managers that had been in the Lapine community previous to Melissa, that was you, Cory. I believe you started in Lapine around 2016 and then moved to the City of Sisters. And so how are things going in the community of Sisters right now?
Things are going well in Sisters. Obviously, the last 2.5 months have been a strain on everyone. I think one of the biggest issues has been the uncertainty around how long certain elements of this pandemic would be presenting challenges for all of us. And so as we have a little bit more clarity, like those have spoken to earlier about actually being in phase 1 and understanding a little bit more about the data around this virus, I think that we've been able to look a little bit ahead. So as it relates to the city and the budget looking into next fiscal year and the rest of 2020 and into 2021, we're really full steam ahead as it relates to our council goals and our work plans. We've actually added some capital projects to next year's budget to try to, in a way, stimulate the economy and get good projects done at the same time. And so that's an important component that we've been able to add on. We postponed our budget committee meetings. Those are going to be at the beginning of next week. So we've tried to buy even a few weeks of extra time to have as much information, as much data as possible to inform those decisions. We've added and created a rainy day fund, being really thoughtful about making sure, like Melissa mentioned, that we have plenty of contingencies, plenty of reserves as a part of our budget. The smaller cities in general, aren't what's called full service cities. So we don't have police in-house. We don't have fire in-house. And so that really takes some of the pressure off of our general fund. And like Melissa mentioned, Sisters fortunately had been in good shape financially before I came here, and we're able to continue on that trend heading into next year. I think the big thing that has changed looking ahead is trying to play a role in our local downtown businesses in particular that have been really hit over the last couple of months. Coming out of winter, that's always the slow time of year. And having this come right after that is really challenging. One of the things we've been saying is we have now seen the entire deck of public events canceled throughout the entire summer of Sisters and beyond, obviously. So we knew we weren't going to have a normal public event season, but we are still preparing for a tourism season. And we're trying to find that balance between obviously public health and then also prosperity and making sure that these businesses have enough as they head into winter 2020 and 21. So we're trying to build things into the budget, trying to be as creative as possible. Like others have said, being really communicative and doing as much outreach as possible. It's challenging as a small city. We're staffed at about 17, and I know La Pine's even about half that. So it makes it hard to step up in that role. But working with the chamber, working with other local partners, we've been doing what we can. So
great. I think that for many, they think of a city and think that there are just, tens of staff that are just sitting behind the scenes doing the work. And sometimes it's the city manager who's writing the grant, who's doing the banking, who's doing the, sometimes out even on a snowplow if necessary and has the right skills. But thank you for that update. So Gus, you've been with the city of Madras as the administrator since around 2011. I'm sure you've experienced some ups and downs. What's the biggest financial impact from this event that you can see so far? And what are you doing at the city of Madras to address that?
Thank you for having me, and thank you, Tammy. We did, when we went through the last recession from 2008 even through 2012 time period, we saw our property taxes decline, but it was really in years 2 and 3 and 4 where we were seeing adjustments. And there's a difference between the retail market value and the maximum assessed value. I don't anticipate property taxes going in decline this first year, and we'll just have to take more time and see what those impacts are if there's some sort of recession that sets in for an extended period. Right now, it seems like our motel tax, our transient room lodging tax, is getting hit the hardest, and particularly in those closure months. We received notice from one of the larger motel operators here that they were down 80%. And so that's a hit, that's heavy. We use those funds to the majority of those funds operate park systems. We don't have a parks district, but they help supplement with some of our general fund. And so that's where we're taking the biggest hit. It's hard to anticipate how fast they can get going again and how much activity will occur. So we'll have to continue to monitor that going forward. But we've just being conservative and reducing that forecast for this next year. We have built reserves in that fund. And so we're not proposing dramatic changes this first year. But if it extends more than 1 year, we will continue to adjust our spending. I do know that the state revenue shares for gas tax and things have been slightly pulled back for less traveling over these last couple months, but it appears that people are wanting to get back on the road. And so I think we just need a little more time to reassess and kind of keep an eye out there. We've noticed restaurants really busy with the phase 1 reopening. And so their activities wanting to get started again in a lot of areas. We've had construction continuing. Been a lot of home builders that just kept building through this, anticipating, hoping for the best. And so we're hoping for that. There are some local government grants out there through particularly Oregon Parks that have been put on hold to see how the state economy is doing and revenues. And we have some active projects that will be put on hold that we're hoping to finish in a phase 2 format. And so those are some anticipated impacts that could just be a timing thing for us. We're ready to move forward with more park improvements. Those are some of the main things with the housing district that we got put in place in December, and we initiated 3 active development agreements since January, and 2 of those 3 are actively building. The third is looking at their financing. They have active projects. We've done some code amendments for them to be able to do townhomes in addition to apartments they wish to do. I think it's a timing thing for them to this market can start to get reopened and start moving again. And so we're hopeful that is not on hold too long, so we can keep moving in stride with them. So there are definitely some impacts. How much we don't know yet. And I think if anything's been consistent for us, we seem to know something new each week that we didn't know a week ago. And I think that might happen for the next couple months here for us. But with that said, overall, happy that the reopening's starting and just looking forward to getting folks back to work.
Great. Thank you for that, Gus. I think you raise a really good point that for the general public, it'll be important to note that this is not this is more of a marathon, not a sprint in terms of the revenue impacts, and that the next upcoming 2 to 3 years will really show where the economy's recovery will be and what that looks like. The immediate impacts won't be quite as prevalent. It'll be more probably next year for your budgets, if anything. So thank you for that. So Eric, the city of Bend had anticipated a transportation funding package on the May ballot, and that was pulled due to the COVID crisis, which makes great sense. What impact do you think this will have on the city's ability to address the growing transportation needs? And do you foresee that the request would be moving to the November ballot, possibly?
Yeah, thanks, Tammy. And I just have to reflect. It was, I think, like only 3 months ago, maybe even less than that, you and I were at City Club talking about the transportation bond and the need to really address transportation holistically, public transit, relieving congestion, economic development, all those things. Those needs are still there. They haven't gone away. So yeah, we did make the decision for a number of reasons. One, I think that the bond market is really volatile right now. So typically, even when stocks plummet, bonds are stable, but that's not the case. They've kind of recovered a bit. But during that time in March, when we were trying to face with this decision whether or not to keep it on the ballot or pull it in May, things were really volatile. And I think Madras made the same decision. They had a different funding source, but again, the same objective of improving their transportation system. And we just felt like, one, getting the message out to voters, not understanding where the bond market's going to go. It was going to be hard to really get the focus of getting that message out to the community. This was not top of mind for folks. So for all those reasons, we pulled it. We will talk about potentially November. I think that is a bit premature. I really don't think we're going to have the certainty that we want as a community about where the economic future lies. I think there's just so much uncertainty right now. So we'll evaluate it, but in order to make a decision for November, the council would need to make that decision in August to meet the November timeline. So that might be a bit premature to think just in 2 months we'll have a better picture of the economy. Probably will be a little bit better, but to be in a place where we feel really certain about the short-term future, I'm not quite sure. So I think it's probably more realistic that it would be something we revisit in 2021. But we'll monitor it closely. I think the good thing, I guess sort of silver lining of all the work that led to the bond package, there was a lot of negotiation that occurred to make sure that it was a balanced package of projects and a 2-year citizen process to create the long-term vision for transportation in Bend up till 2040. All that work and all that planning is going to result in a refreshed TSP, which we're still moving forward. TSP is a transportation system plan. It's that kind of document that guides a lot of our growth. That's still moving forward and will be voted on this summer with our planning commission and city council. But what that does, though, is it puts us in a position to take some of that work and some of those projects, especially those projects on the state system. So part of our bond request actually had improvements to Highway 97, the Parkway, and Highway 20. So we are in this environment. We know that there's not money coming down from the federal and state levels like there had been for transportation projects. So we need to sort of do our part at the local level to leverage some of those funds. So I think we're in a good position, given that we've done that planning and in some cases that design and engineering work, to put ourselves in a position to potentially apply for stimulus dollars. So just like in 2008, 2009, in that recession, there was packages put forward. And as we know, we're not done yet with the federal relief packages. And there has been some talk of transportation being a way to kickstart the economy. So we feel good about being in a position to still advance some of those projects that were on that bond list. So it could be that bond, that $190 million bond project list that we had envisioned might change a little bit if we have other funding opportunities that become realized over the next couple of months.
Thank you for that. And I don't know about you, but my crystal ball is foggy and cracked. So August seems like it's tomorrow almost. So good luck in terms of determining what the right movement forward looks like. I think you're correct in terms of the stimulus funds that tend to come during a crisis such as this. And infrastructure is definitely one of the investments that the federal government and the state even looks to make those improvements during a time like this. So being prepared and ready so that we don't have to do that pre-planning for our region is really critical. So speaking of the revenue impacts, tourism plays a vital role in our region's economy. Prior to the COVID-19 event, the pressure of visitors to our region was of great concern to our residents. And now that tourism concern is turned a little bit different in nature in terms of health. So Keith, how do you see the reduction of tourism and the loss of revenue playing out in Redmond? And how do you see this impacting one of our greatest regional assets, which is the airport?
It's good. I prepared for that question. No, I think that, the tourism impacts have been significant, both in Bend and Redmond, right? Getting 10 to 15% of what you normally get in terms of tourism has had really deep impacts. For our airport, just so people can get a sense of the numbers. So we would typically have 3,000 people coming and going each day in the airport. And during the height of the pandemic, we had about 150. Wow. And recently, like the numbers this week, we've peaked at around 400. So that's down 85%. And we're fortunate in that the Federal CARES Act passed an airport relief bond, or airport relief package that was around $10 billion, maybe a little bit more. And Redmond was fortunate to get about $9 million of that. So that's going to get us through the next year or so. But yeah, as you said earlier, like it's not going to end anytime soon, particularly with air traffic. It's not going to normalize for, probably 18 to 24 months. Now, with Redmond getting back to the tourism piece, we just got done with this great partnership to renovate the Redmond Hotel, and it's called Soul Community Planet Redmond. It's about a 48-room hotel right in the heart of downtown Redmond at 6th and Evergreen. And they were filled this weekend. So that was super exciting. And they've got a local provisions market on the ground floor. And that hotel, we invested urban renewal in it with the understanding that that's going to help drive the downtown. And so for that hotel to succeed and for the spillover effects to help some businesses as they kind of creep and crawl their way back to whatever normal ends up being is going to be really important to us. Let me make one other comment on with Ben's transportation bond. Redmond Fire was fortunate, and that's not part of the city. It's a separate jurisdiction where they had an operating levy that went out and won 2-1 in the May election. And when you look at the financial items that were placed on ballots across the state, I think it was close to 3-1 them passing. So that the needs in this case, right, with Ben, the transportation needs exist. We're going to continue to get more and more people here. And our region continues to need these resources to make sure that we've got the infrastructure and the resources we have to help a growing population.
That's an important note to make. Definitely think that being ready as a region is going to benefit all of us. As we look at those tourism aspects and we look at the events that are signature to our area, they're important. Things like the Pull Pedal Paddle, the Sisters Quilt Show, the Lapine Frontier Days, Crooked River Roundup. The cancellation of these events definitely impacts our communities and the ability for those events to weather this storm in general. So, Cory, you touched on this a little bit earlier when you were talking about now with, I believe it's the Sisters Folk Fest that is now canceled as of today. The events themselves, and with the cancellation of the Sisters Rodeo and the Quilt Show, it undoubtedly has a big impact on your city. How do you see these, the loss of this revenue, but also loss of these events impacting the community of Sisters, but also those events themselves? Do you think that they will survive? And what is the city doing in order to be able to support them and making sure that they can weather this storm?
Good question, Tammy. And yeah, as you mentioned, these events are vital both culturally and economically for our community. The big thing that I'd heard talking with these event promoters over the last several months, as they, as their date had neared, and they knew that they had to kind of fish or cut bait, so to speak, was trying to wrestle with this uncertainty, and even with a little more certainty now, looking out into August or October, there's still not enough as it relates to gatherings and to public events and how to manage that and where we'll be in terms of this public health crisis. One thing that I have really respected about these event promoters is their attitude. This is a really hard time for them to manage through this. So they've been calling it a postponement to 2021 versus a cancellation. The other piece is that they do so much and give so much back to our community as well, whether it's in the schools or otherwise. So again, both economically and culturally play a really significant role here in Sisters. One of the big things that we're going to want to try to do is build in more resiliency around our tourism economy. So we, like several other communities in Central Oregon, Steve mentioned this earlier, have done a really good job building a robust traded sector economy in Sisters. People don't see it or don't know us for that, but we have some really flagship companies like Metabolic Maintenance and Laird Superfood, and a real thriving energy around entrepreneurship here in Sisters. But to make the tourism economy more resilient, we're looking at doing a tourism strategic plan for the first time, hopefully this fall and into winter. And also it's part of the Sisters Country vision, and finding a way to make Sisters more of a four-season tourist destination instead of really having all our eggs in one basket for the 4 or 5 months, summer months. And so as we take those steps, we were planning to do that pre-COVID, and now even more than ever, it's really important that we find ways to implement that and build in more resiliency for our economy and for our cultural events as well.
The tourism strategic plan really sounds like a great idea and really forward thinking. So Steve, I'm going to turn to you for a moment because I believe that this is the 75th anniversary for the Crook County Roundup, of which, using Cory's words, that's going to be postponed until 2021. Thoughts on that and thoughts on the impact to your community in Crook County and Prineville?
Yeah, it's thank you. It's very, very significant to our community and again, the region in terms of the combination of the Crooked River Roundup and the pari-mutuel horse racing, about 10 days after the Roundup event. And we're bringing in between 20 and 25,000 visitors to our community for those two events combined. So it does have a dramatic impact. And it is the 75th. We did a big celebration in February. I have resigned from the board after about 20 years. So I'm very familiar with that organization, the Crooked River Roundup Association. So for those of you who are familiar with rodeo, oftentimes, especially in the rough stock events, if the horse stumbles or there's a foul of no consequence to the competitor, in other words, it wasn't a competitor's fault, they get what's called as a re-ride. So what we're doing here locally, the community and the Roundup Board is calling 2021 Re-Ride 75. So the communication that we want to focus on is we will be back. We have a good amount of reserves and the importance of having those contingencies in that organization. So we expect to be back. But having said that, I think more importantly, and we touched on it with some other manager comments here today, is I think we got to really work hard to get confidence, safety back into our mindset, across the country, obviously, but certainly we need to work on that. People are not going to feel comfortable in these big venues until we have some more information. We have some results as it relates to treatments and obviously, for prevention. So I think that we have some work to do on learning what the end result of this pandemic will be and what the resolvement will be in terms of gaining that confidence back. We're a resilient group. I think all of us have a resilient streak in us here in Central Oregon, especially. And we need to look at some alternatives, like what I see happening with our graduating seniors. We have some events scheduled that respect the social distancing, but honor these graduating seniors. I think we'll see some same things happen as it relates to the 4-H kids and the importance of those fair animals and the proceeds that are generated as a result of those activities. Maybe there's some online options that will be practice that helps those kids out. I think we'll see more and more of these innovative, resilient type alternatives being developed to build a bridge between now and when we can get that health and safety confidence back for our community to move forward. And to maybe some degree, we have to reinvent some of these traditional cultural icons of activity that we have in Central Oregon. We might have to adjust a little bit, but that's not all a bad thing. I just think we have a lot more to learn, and we got to keep our eye on the prize, which is safety and getting the confidence in that safety back for keeping everybody healthy.
Excellent. Love those comments and look forward to the re-ride in 2021. The horse racing is certainly a wonderful event, as is the lawnmower races in La Pine too. So if we think about signature events around our region, we've got some incredible ones.
We do.
So I'm going to move on to housing, which has long been an issue for our region. Rental availability and affordability, along with availability of entry-level and mid-market housing for homeownership. How do you see the COVID-19 event changing this dynamic in our region? And Melissa, I'm going to turn to you. You had mentioned that your permit activity is going well. I saw a article or so that the Russell property is being utilized soon, is going to be built on. So thoughts on what's happening in the La Pine community?
Yeah, like I said before, that's the one thing that probably didn't change in La Pine. Surprisingly, you would think in something like this, I've seen it before, that obviously the recessions and depressions, they stop. Everything stops and stands still. We had a huge subdivision with some commercial go through, and the developer's still out there putting in his infrastructure every day. I think that's about 80 houses. We have another development. They haven't even batted an eye. They're still going through working on some agreements, and that's 2 multifamily projects. And then, a 10 unit subdivision coming in tomorrow night, so it's still going, and surprisingly, but we'll see. We're watching. One of the things we have been watching is our utilities, and obviously we're not the same scale as Bend or Redmond, but when you have a shutoff notice, it's pretty noticeable in La Pine. I mean, we have, our usual people, same few that seem to be chronic, and that's the way they live their life. But we went from, I think, 10 last month, our usual amount, and I think the numbers today came in, and I think we're at 25 for shutoff notices, which is, again, in the grand scheme of things, when you're talking La Pine, that's pretty substantial. That's a pretty good indication of what's happening. So I got another month out there. I'm going to be watching this and seeing what's happening as far as our people and our citizens and how they're handling COVID, and then go from there. But as far as housing and development, we're doing fine. So we'll see.
Wow. I read a recent study that around 1 in 5 is unemployed right now around our region, give or take, depending on where you're at. I think it might be a good time to plug the CentralOregonResources.org. That's a website for our entire region, which has energy assistance, rental assistance for anyone who might be watching and has concern. Those pieces to the puzzle, as you noted, it isn't just the housing, it's the ability to afford to live in that home too. So Keith, I'm going to turn to you for a moment. Redmond was recently successful in getting House Bill 2336 approved through the legislature, and that was championed by Representative Zika, which opens the door to an affordable housing project to build about 485 homes. It's a 50-50 mix of affordable and market-priced homes, which is great. Will this project continue to move forward, and how will this affect the housing issues that we're facing in the region?
Yes, it will continue to move forward, and we're in the process of still figuring out the design of it and the phasing and the kinds of products that we want. But the broader housing issue, we're seeing. I mean, what we're seeing is probably what everybody else is seeing, right? There's a lot of activity still. April was a little bit slower than April 2019, but still very steady. And what we've heard from home builders, they'll continue to build out the master plans that they have in place right now. And then it's kind of uncertain what would happen after that. We know that with the banks, they're protecting and hedging their level of risk more than they have in the past. So as you talked about earlier, Tammy, right, the crystal ball or whatever people look at to predict the future is a bit uncertain. But we also know that Central Oregon continues to be a really appealing place. And when I've talked to people that I know in some of the larger cities that are obviously locked down a lot more than us, we're talking like Chicago, New York, Atlanta, there's going to be a lot of people are going to say, I'm not going to wait any longer on kind of getting out of the city. I've always wanted to live someplace like Central Oregon, and we're going to see more people coming in, which makes it more incumbent upon us as city leaders and our electeds and everyone involved in the region to figure out how we don't price out folks that need a place to live and need a quality place to live, but don't have the incomes that other individuals have. So being able to develop the 40 acres, I want to thank the county again for providing us with the land and getting 400 to 500 units, at least half of which would be at that affordability range that somebody making anywhere from $35,000 to $60,000 could afford, is going to be critical, and we're continuing to move forward with it. And the work that Jack Zika did to spearhead it and then help cut the local deals can't be understated enough. He was incredibly helpful with that.
Great. I'm happy to hear that that's going to continue to go forward. So let's talk a bit about the reopening in phase 1. How has this process gone for the city of Madras, Gus? And what's the city doing to support the businesses and communities to successfully progress through this reopening phase?
Well, we've had the fortunate opportunity to help in a number of ways, and it wasn't obvious how we would in just trying to gather information to understand what could we do, what assistance was coming, what did the federal aid package look like, and it hit us about suppose it was mid-April, and we saw Crook County and Prineville making a great lead on getting dollars out. And we decided that in the council and the our urban renewal district decided we want to follow a similar lead, and we're going to get some emergency assistant grants out there. And so we just issued checks this last week, and they've been received really well. And a lot of them went to small businesses that were, whether salons, restaurants, or businesses heavily impacted gyms. We got money into those folks' hands, at least cover some essentials and kind of be a bridge between what federal aid they could contact with, and just to try to get them to when they get this phased opening started again. And so we had 82 applicants awarded. We've only done a phase one. We're getting ready to meet again and do a phase two. For those folks that maybe missed the first round, we got it out, and once we got the platform up, it was a 10-day turnaround. And when we had observed what Crook County had done, that they had gotten a second wave of folks after their first round. And so I think we are moving that direction for our second round. The things that we did to be sensitive to businesses, we had a prepared food and beverage tax proposed to voters in May. And restaurants were hit so hard that we just decided to postpone it, that it was too much and that they were already in a difficult position. And so we've just postponed that till the economy gets healthier and stronger. Other things that we did was put some dollars out to help with additional signing for restaurants that maybe weren't signed for to go, or information to come in and get takeout. We did advertising for takeout impacted restaurants multiple weeks in our local newspaper. We've offered technical assistance to set up online retail platforms using an Oregon Main Street program consultant. We have postponed our water and sewer rate increases for at least 6 months, and we might go out 12. We'll reassess as we go here. And then we had one business owner, I think it was a local insurance company, said, hey, go ahead and lift that no truck parking out on our block so that restaurant, a truck can stop and go eat and get takeout from the restaurant across there. And we've had a lot of that community pulling together. And so we postponed some of those type things, or temporarily lifted some of those restrictions that were in place before. And so those are a lot of the things that we're actively doing right now that have really seemed to be welcomed by the community and appreciated, and thankful that we've had the opportunity to do it. But it has felt absolutely crazy, because we still need to do our active, whether getting our budget committees together, keeping normal processes going, but in the middle trying to figure out how to do a COVID response and set up a grant task force and get grants out. It's felt a little bit crazy to respond in the middle of this. And then a huge demand for communication, people wanting to know what's happening, when's it going to happen, how can we do what next? And really that's been controlled heavily by the state of Oregon with very limited information until it's a go. We literally had our county health director say, we didn't actually know all the conditions of phase one until May 15th when it was issued to us. And we're getting a lot of questions around phase two opening, what's that look like? And there is not guidance yet. And so it's just working through helping people understand what we know, understand we don't know everything yet, and we're going to try to continue to communicate best we can as we learn more. But patience isn't one of all of our strong suits, and so that's what we continue to work on. But thank you, Tammy.
You bet. I bet in the city administrator or city manager job description, it states other duties as assigned, and next the ability to roll with it. So there is a lot of uncertainty and a lot of unknowns. Steve, did you want to note anything about the Prineville funds that are going into your community as well?
Well, I just would like to reinforce the fact that it took more than just the city or the county or Facebook. We had a lot of participation from the Downtown Association, Chamber. So there was a number of different groups that pulled together to make that possible. And obviously having Facebook's horsepower behind that project really helped out. But we all participated, just that their ability to participate is a little greater than ours. So I think, I'm very glad that Madras was able to learn a few things from that experience here in Prineville. And I can say with certainty that this has kept a lot of lifeblood into those small businesses, and they're going to make it through as a result of this bridge that was built across Central Oregon. But certainly, what Gus did over Madras, I know that's going to keep people going, and that's a big deal right now.
Great. Thank you for noting that. And a lot of the notes and the comments that you're making talk about the working together and coming together to solve community issues. And so our region has a history of doing that, of working well together. Does an event such as this spur conversation about leveraging resources or elevating our collective needs, such as sharing services to more efficiently utilize our limited resources? Does it bring about the opportunity to talk about water, to talk about land use planning, to talk about housing? Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you. Does this bring about the opportunity for us to be thinking a little bit differently?
Yeah, a big fat yes, of course. This is a huge opportunity for us to, I think, again, build off of the strength that's already there as you work really well together. I think it's thanks to you and to Scott Aycock at the Central Oregon Intergovernmental Council. We get to see each other. The folks on this screen, as I'm seeing them right now, we see each other every month or every other month. And coordinate a lot. And there's that foundation that's already there. And I would say, just kind of point out some of the things I said earlier. We've got shared agreements on public works, equipment and services. We've got emergency management agreements. We've got mutual aid agreements for fire and EMS. COIC has taken on that role of helping us with water resource management in the Tri-County area and developing a new collaborative, kind of going off of the work that the Basin Study Work Group and other efforts through the Deschutes River Conservancy have kind of laid the foundation for. So there's a lot of great work that's happening. I think there's some opportunities, though, to go beyond that. I think going back to some of the topics that we've all talked about, like land use and growth management strategies, is our initial intention for this City Club event was to focus on that. There's still a lot of work to do. There's times where the statewide land use system just does not work for us here in Central Oregon. And, I'm a big advocate for kind of a regional approach to some of our challenges there. And so if we can strengthen that and do some of that groundwork at the local level, I think there's maybe some work that we could do to help shift some of that conversation in Salem without dismantling it. I think there's a lot of concern when we start talking about land use that it's a binary all or nothing. I think there's a lot of nuance there to work within our regional context. Housing, affordable housing is talked about today. I think more work is needed there. Legislative advocacy, making sure that our voice is amplified. Again, we're doing that work already. We have a Central Oregon Cities organization that has been in existence for many years. So that's something to continue to build off of. And then probably as we I'll go through sort of variations of budget shortfalls. I think there's opportunity for some of those more, I would call them back of the house central services, HR, IT, legal services that could be shared more efficiently across the region. So I think that we have got the infrastructure in place, the format to be able to have those conversations, and we all just need to. And I feel really confident with the group that's in front of us, that's in front of me right now on my screen, that we can work through those issues and identify. I think that's what taxpayers expect, is that we're all working together and making sure that we're not duplicating anything, and that we're building off of each other. Because there's many things that we don't do even though we're a larger city, there's things that I know our smaller cities do a lot better than Bend, and we need to leverage those strengths more appropriately. And so I'm so thankful for being a city manager here in Central Oregon, because I think we do that really well.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And I think you're right. We are really fortunate to be in this region where we work well together and can leverage those resources. Maybe when the dust settles, City Club will have us back, hopefully next year, and have an opportunity to talk about some of those regional planning efforts and ways in which we can strengthen that going forward too. So the last formal question that I have for the group, and I'm going to ask each one of you, we have a little bit of time. How do we leverage the experiences that we've been through with this event to reimagine our future? And is there an unexpected opportunity or silver lining that has emerged from this event? And Melissa, I'm going to start with you.
Oh, man. I'm just speaking for myself, being a new city manager in a again, probably overstated it, small town. You know, when we talk about how it affected us, and yeah, we had restaurants and beauty salons. Again, most of our grocery and everything else was essential. But when you talk about our restaurants, and I made this comment to several people, you know, La Pine, as much as I probably would like it to be more, we just aren't that destination place for going to eat a night out. You know, nobody from Prineville or Redmond's going to that place in La Pine for dinner, you know, and then making that drive. Maybe the Cowboy Dinner Tree, but that's a whole different topic. So, you know, when the shutdown happened, our restaurants really suffered because they rely on the local community. It's not tourism. It's not the outside neighboring cities. It's La Pine people and a little bit of that zip code surrounding. But, you know, it was really interesting to see, and probably because we are so small, those 5 or 6 restaurants probably did better through COVID. They'd probably argue that, but, you know, shutting down with to-go, you know, lines out the door, you know, people eating that normally wouldn't eat out. I certainly did and have the pounds to prove it, but that was really interesting to me and really enlightening, and really just that small town pride, you know, that you want to see. And people supporting their own, and we did have some casualties, but they weren't COVID related, and so that's been really interesting. And I think just the you know, the testament of a small town, and that's what we were able to do for ourselves. And so it will be interesting seeing how we pull together if that continues going forward.
That's great. Love the small town pride. Cory, how about you? Any silver linings, opportunities, or things that have come about?
There's a few takeaways and a few themes that I think we should emphasize and continue to put at the forefront. I think humility is important, and understanding that, you know, as a region, growth has been on our side and is a good thing and is going to continue to help buoy us through something like this. Now, of course, you have to manage it. You have to help shape that growth so we don't lose our heritage and our character. But we need to put that in perspective, that other areas have been hit harder than us, and that hopefully our road to recovery is going to probably be a little smoother than some other areas as well. I think in terms of policy making and local government in particular, I think every layer of government could take a page out of this book, though, putting evidence-based policy making at the forefront and living in a more complicated, more connected, more global world than ever is hard to manage. And I think we need to kind of back to that humility piece. We need to really take a scientific, measured approach to things. And it's also hard to educate the general public on what all that means, because even managing local government is very complex, let alone working at county, state, federal, and international levels. I think the final piece, kind of two-pronged, is whenever you have an issue like this, it forces you to look at things with fresh eyes, and you may notice things that you hadn't noticed previously. You may be able to find new efficiencies. You may be able to experiment. And that's one thing that I think government in general, people like to say the government should be more like the private sector, more like business. Well, we like ingenuity. We like thinking creatively, but it's challenging when you're working with taxpayer dollars. There's generally a risk aversion. And I think in times like this, we have to think outside the box, and we have to be willing to experiment and try things in a thoughtful, measured, evidence-based way, and go from there. So those are just a few of the big takeaways I've had so far.
I appreciate that. And it goes into what Gus was saying about the investments that they're making in the city of Madras. So Gus, would you like to offer some comments as well?
Well, I think we continue to assess what we can do with the information that we have. And that was the hard part of, do we do the grants? There was some saying, should we do a loan or should we wait for a second recovery down the way? And I think what was pressing on folks was just, if we stay closed a few months, what was pressing for the urban renewal district for us is we've had the biggest number of facade renovation investments in the downtown since the district opened in 2003. And we hated to lose half of them because they couldn't be open for a few months. And so that really pressed heavily on them to free up some dollars, get a legal opinion if we can give aid for utility and mortgage rent assistance. And the risk was determined it's worth it if we can keep them from going out of business and be able to reopen. And so that, I think because of the investments that have happened over the last couple of years and that we're right in the middle of now, that pushed us over the limit and said it's worth giving out some grants to folks now versus later, and we will reassess what we can do additionally later as well. So that was a big push for us. We're still in the middle of that. Sure,
and will be for a bit, I bet.
Yes.
So, Steve, how about you?
Well, I think, if ever, the old saying is necessity is the motherhood of invention. I think that applies to our situation with COVID-19. I think we're better prepared for these types of events, whether that's, another pandemic, whether that's an emergency event, our communication links between our agencies, whether, the EOC system, our public safety, fire, health department. I think those communication networks have been strengthened as a result of experiencing this. I think, back to partnerships, the importance of having those partnerships and working together is highlighted when we get into these situations. And I do think we have an opportunity to have some takeaways on reinventing some of the ways we do business. And just like having this meeting we're having today on Zoom compared to what we would traditionally do, I think there's efficiencies and effectiveness, and there's going to be times even when we get back to, as Keith says, whatever normal will be in the future. I think these are tools that we will be able to deploy and become more effective and more efficient. And again, to somebody's point just a minute ago, I think that's what the taxpayers expect of us. And it is difficult. I came from the private sector, and Cory is exactly right. We are risk adverse in the public sector. And having said that, it is appropriate, however, I think, to take some risks and get outside the box. And I think this pandemic that we've experienced has forced that to happen. And when that happens, we learn. And hopefully what we learn, we can take forward and be better prepared for the next challenge that will inevitably come our way.
You bet. And we've also learned that you're learning from each other too. So we're not reinventing things, we're leveraging each other's resources. So Keith, how about from you in terms of reimagining our future?
Yeah, so we you never let a good crisis go to waste, right? So we annexed Bend last night at council, and I'll be naming a new police chief overseeing both departments tomorrow as well.
Did you say that? Did you say that? You
did I just say that?
Yeah.
Say which? Yeah, I did. Yeah, come on. We got to have some fun here. No, I mean, actually, I agree with everything Steve said, and you particularly look at the work that Sergeant Garraby and Sheriff Nelson do to talk about what happens when Cascadia hits in emergency management. And we've actually had to go through an emergency now. And so rather than just doing tabletop exercises about what you're going to do when crisis hits, we've all had firsthand experience of exactly what we would do, proverbially tomorrow, if something occurred that we've got to be decisive. We've got to make decisions with the best information we have, which is never going to be perfect. And we've got to reach out to our partners. And again, the partnerships that go on in the region is not just the whatever 6 or 7 that are here, on this screen. And you've got COIC, Bend Parks and Rec, the counties, everybody stepped forward. The representative from the governor's office that works in Central Oregon to try and solve these problems. And that's rare. And when you look at what's going on, particularly, let's just say around the country where there's divisiveness and partisanship, it's so nice to see that in Central Oregon, everyone's like giving time to each other to make sure we come up with the best solutions to do our work.
Wonderful. Eric, comments? Now that you've been annexed into the city of Redmond.
There's been so many good comments. I feel like I would just be piling on. So I'll keep it short. And I know there's probably some questions you need to get to from the audience. So I just would echo everything that everybody said. I thought it was all really exactly on point.
Great. And I love that Ben's been annexed into Redmond. We'll see how that goes.
I know.
Yes.
Life is getting easy for me now.
Right.
I've got a position for you.
I love it. Okay, so we do have some questions from the audience, and so I'll go ahead and get started, and then Joey, our executive director from City Club of Central Oregon, will let me know if there are other questions. So the first one is about the relationship between the private sector, of which we've noted a bit here today. Do you as managers feel that you have a good understanding of how your staff operates and interacts with developers and design professionals? And I suspect that means in terms of the ability to meet the need and to serve the needs of the community as well. So, Steve, I'll go ahead and ask you that question if you don't mind.
Well, thank you. And I think across the board, and I certainly can't talk for the other cities or administrators, but certainly I would argue across the board, I think we do have a good understanding of that. I think those are some lessons we learned during the recession, quite frankly. And so I think for the most part that Central Oregon is a business friendly. We have a business approach. I speak a lot to my staff here and my partners here about being solution based. And what I mean by that is listen first. And then we all recognize that in government we have rules and policies and ORSs and all kinds of things that we dictate the left and right limits of what we can and cannot do. But listening first, I think, is a great quality to build that relationship with the private sector. And I think if you look, without an exception, Cory talked about the traded sector build out and growth in Sisters, Oregon. We've got a lot of good things going on in Madras, certainly, Bend and Redmond, new businesses, Prineville. All of us in Central Oregon have put together a lot of great new business startups, big name companies coming in and setting up shop. We got a great place to live, and I know that doesn't hurt us any. But we also, I think it's a reflection of understanding what it takes to conduct business and create an environment. And I believe that's really our challenge as local government, is to create that environment where people want to come and live and work and play, and businesses want to site. That's our challenge. And I think, we always have room to improve, and we have things that we can learn and become more effective with. But I do think the track record clearly shows that we have been successful in developing an environment where new businesses and existing businesses want to site and grow.
Excellent. Thank you. So the next audience question is around homelessness. How has COVID-19 impacted your city's homeless population, and what measures are being taken to address any conditions created by the crisis? And this one, I'm going to go with the smaller community of La Pine and the larger community of Bend. So are you seeing changes, Melissa, in the community of La Pine?
Honestly, no.
Okay.
Our homeless population is mostly in RVs. We have a lot of homeless RVs, that I call it, and there happens to be people in them. We haven't seen that segment of our population impacted as much. Just haven't seen it. And it may be because I'm insulated and I'm not really out there and I'm not one of the ones working with it. I know that obviously our one homeless shelter that I know of had to shut down, our warming shelter. I don't know if they're up and running yet, but I just don't have a good answer. Sorry.
Well, and that's okay. Sometimes there isn't a good answer. It's knowing that it's being discussed and knowing that the community is aware. And it sounds as though you have a community resource of the warming shelter too, which is a great thing because I know that hadn't existed a few years back. So, Eric, how about you? I know there's been a lot of publicity around Juniper Ridge and around homelessness as the largest city here in our area. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the going back to your previous question about silver lining, I think the idea of we need to put more of a focus on vulnerable populations, and homelessness is part of that, because we know from history that crises have a disproportionate negative effect on those that are economically disadvantaged. And so some of the work that the Emergency Operations Center has done to put a real focus on, because there is a risk of folks that are camping or living in a situation that might not be sanitary with a health pandemic. So we've EOC to get hand washing stations, scattered throughout the city. We've done a resource mapping in partnership with Bend Parks and Rec and Deschutes County Public Health and other agencies to make sure that we identify where resources are so that people can get help where needed, both from sort of from a mobile perspective and then just the good old-fashioned flyers and pamphlets, et cetera. We've been able to do some mobile kind of outreach units within Juniper Ridge. So we have a weekly event that's done in partnership with Mosaic, COVO, the Central Oregon Veterans Outreach Center, to make sure that we're connecting folks to services. I think that's what's really exposed. I think the lack of capacity within our region to provide mental health, addiction support. There's so many gaps in our social service safety net that we know existed before, but now it's really apparent. So as we think about recovery plans, I think a special focus needs to be on that area. And I feel like that people are starting to realize that now. And so I'm hopeful that we could leverage some of what's been occurring and just put more of it towards recovery.
Excellent. Okay, so next question, and Cory, I'm going to throw this one your direction. How can we create more regional networks for biking in Central Oregon? I know there had been some trails discussion around the Sisters community out to Black Butte and a number of other efforts. Comments on that?
Well, it takes a team effort. Obviously, if you've got a trail, it's starting somewhere, it's ending somewhere, and it's going through various areas. And so, making sure that all those folks are at the table. Generally, that means the cities, county, and likely Forest Service as well as ODOT are all at the table for that effort. I know there's a robust bicycle pedestrian advisory committee, at least in Deschutes County. I know the Sisters Country Vision, both in terms of livability and connectivity, spoke to trails. The Sisters Trail Alliance, their reputation precedes them in terms of being able to forge new trails and new paths in and around Sisters Country. And so, where there's a will, there's a way. And so obviously working collaboratively in terms of planning and then ultimately being able to find resources to be able to construct those paths is really critical. But ultimately with anything, someone's got to champion that. And I think that groups like BPAC, Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, and STA, Sisters Trail Alliance, at least for Sisters Country, with partners like the Forest Service and the city and county and ODOT, can help further that. And we recognize that that's really important in terms of livability, people's health and being active. And then also, as an opportunity in terms of multimodal transportation. And that will be, I think, a chapter that Central Oregon is just at the beginning of in terms of obviously public transit and other modes of transit, being a rural area. But that's important. And so we've got to continue to look to the future and plan for that.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So Gus, I'm going to throw the next one to you. As of May 21st, 2020, the U.S. Drought Monitor places much of Oregon in moderate to extreme drought conditions. Portions of Crook, Deschutes, and Jefferson counties are rated as severe to extreme drought. How are the cities planning for the potential of a protracted drought?
Well, that is just observing. The city has water right from the Deschutes as well. The county does. Our farmers have had to put more ground into non-production. And so there's additional weed abatement and things that go along with not having that in production. It also adjusts what they do have in production. So it has a cumulative impact, but so far folks seem to be focusing on going into crops that maybe harvest once and don't need to be watered all season long. And so there is a strategy each farmer is using. The ways we've worked together here that I've seen locally is we have a youth fishing pond that is filled with water right, but we've only got roughly 1.25 feet of 2 feet that we normally get to order. And they've not been able to keep it filled. So we shifted some of the city's water right to them in a transfer, and then we shifted some of our treated wastewater back on the ground that we're trying to irrigate. And so we're trying to be creative in how we utilize water. Our wastewater systems, we irrigate out after treatment. And so we have some additional irrigation options. And so we're just trying to be creative, pull together as a community, but there are some cumulative impacts that are concerning, and particularly in drought years, it puts additional pressures on the farmers to sustain, and it does make us highly concerned. I know it has other repercussions around fire hazard and fire danger as well, but being one of a small hobby farmer myself, we're just we've got about half of our place in production, and that's just what you do. You work with what you got. But for those folks that are midway into owning their farm and trying to figure out how to do it, it is a juggle and a little bit nerve-wracking. But we're at the mercy of what's provided, and we're just trying to do our best to adjust.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Gus. Anyone else want to weigh in on the water issue? Okay.
Yeah, I'll go ahead if that's
go ahead, Steve. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's just real important, as we move forward in time with, climate change and just the conditions of what the future may bring in terms of water availability. Certainly have cultural pressures as it relates to environmental concerns that we have to deal with. I think we have another example of working together with what we see happening with the HCP process, with Crooked River legislation, for example, and the collaborative effects of getting some things put in place that help us achieve what I would call stability as we look forward. But having said that, I think we're in a great position in Central Oregon to be looking at things. And again, I think Prineville's trying to lead, and obviously the data centers have given us a pathway to lead in some different ways. And for example, the wetland process over here, we're returning cold, clean, naturally polished water back to the Crooked River, reducing temperature. We're looking at aquifer storage and recharge. We're doing that right now, which gives us some flexibility in terms of drought conditions and being able to manage through that without stressing the river more than you normally would during drought conditions for municipal use. I think the other opportunity that we have as municipalities is, as times march forward, the viability of treating wastewater for agricultural purposes, for industrial purposes, and really it could be for all purposes, including drinking water, is becoming more and more viable. And certainly in Prineville, we've taken steps to build an infrastructure that would support taking wastewater and recycling it for industrial use, i.e. the cooling of the data center operations. So I think as we march forward in time, those are the type of out of the box thinking that we need to deploy. And again, I think it fits into our culture here in Central Oregon. And I think a lot of the things you've heard from the city managers today are very indicative of getting outside the box, being flexible, and finding solutions to these very complex and difficult problems and challenges that we face. But water is precious, and we have to be very steadfast in finding those solutions, and time is of the essence. So good job on what we've done so far, but we've got a long ways to go.
Yes, well said. Thank you. So next I'm going to pivot to Keith, and the question is, how can we incentivize waste reduction to maximize the life of our landfill? So from a city perspective, the counties operate the landfills, but from a city perspective, what are your thoughts?
Well, let's see. It's like Jeopardy. Yeah, I think that the more options people have for how they're getting rid of household waste is important, right? So we're working with Republic to do something that Ben's already doing now, which is food waste, doing a pilot program to provide opportunities. So you can have food waste in one bin, right? You can have your glass in another bin, your standard paper and can recycling, and then trash. It's getting more and more complex as people have been reading about that. Recycling is costing a lot more. And so given the external markets in a number of the foreign countries, so we could be in a situation where there actually is more waste going to the landfills because of just the economics of recycling. But I think the communities that do well with reducing waste and finding ways to indirectly incentivize it is making it easy and giving people a wide variety of options for how they want to get rid of something that they've used or consumed in their house.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
And I love the Jeopardy. It does sort of feel that way. So last question. And Eric, I'm going to turn to you, and it seems fitting. It's one about public involvement. And so the question is, how do the panelists, so you, Eric, view the COVID's fallout, if you will, on your jurisdiction's ability to adhere to the state's public records and open meetings statutes? And what do you see as the negative, positive, or maybe somewhere in between impacts of those? Has it been difficult to have public involvement?
I think there was some initial concern that, it would be difficult, but our experience has been, and I'm going to go right to the neighborhood level, our neighborhood associations, per our development code, have the ability to participate. They have a right to participate in land use decisions. And so there was a lot of pushback from neighborhoods initially when there's development has happened, just as mentioned in the other communities. In Bend, it's still staying steady and things are moving along. And so there is a public participation component to that. And we had to move to virtual. And actually, some of our best attended neighborhood association meetings have been virtual. So I think we've actually increased some of our community participation by experimenting in these platforms. And as talked about, this kind of what we're doing right now probably would have been a 6 or 7 year process, but we did it in like a month. And so that's been, I think it's been a real positive from my perspective on the public participation side. I will say though, from a governing board, when you're a governing board as a council or board of county commission, whatnot, it's hard to make decisions in a virtual format. Body language is super important. And just being able to pick up on those subtle cues, it's not the same. So making policy is a little harder. I would say getting information out is easier. We've been doing a lot of kind of virtual employee town halls. So we've been able to get our 500, 600, 700 employees all signed on to receive messages and keep updated on what's happening with the pandemic. And that's been great. And I want to continue that moving forward to continue with communication. But there are some downsides. I think, the decision-making is not, I think, as good as it could be in a virtual environment.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so we have come to the end of the questions. I want to thank Melissa, Gus, Steve, Eric, Cory, Keith, for your time today. And I know you're super busy. Your schedules have a lot happening right now. We heard a lot today about resilience. We heard about strong partnerships, leveraging resources, and the 2021 reride. So a lot of really fun things in front of us, and I have great confidence in our ability to address all that's coming at us. Much gratitude to Steel Associate Architects, Miller Lumber, Ashley and Vance Engineering, and Empire Construction and Development as today's presenting sponsors, and to supporting sponsors Flagline Engineers, SunWest Builders, and Acuity Wealth Advisors. We could not continue to do what we do without your support. Starting next month, our live stream programs will move to noon on the first and third Thursday of each month, and we hope that you will continue to watch and be engaged. Our next live stream is Respond, Recover, and Rebuild: How Philanthropy and Nonprofits Can Highlight That Getting Back to Normal Will Not Be Enough, with speaker Max Williams, the CEO and president of the Oregon Community Foundation. Please watch next Thursday, June 4th at noon on our Facebook page and your YouTube channel. Remember, if you enjoyed today's forum and would like to help cover our costs, please consider becoming a member or sponsor or making a donation to City Club at cityclubcentraloregon.org. Thank you for watching. Please continue to cultivate conversation about issues that connect us all to build a strong community. I think that's it.